Hello, this video is to show how to convert a CSV or Excel file with transactions, typically downloaded from your bank, or you can create it yourself. How to convert it to QBO or Web Connect for Quickbooks format and import it into Quickbooks. We're gonna use ProperSoft CSV2QBO utility. You can download it at propersoft.net/CSV2QBO. Click PC download if you download for PC, or click Mac download if you download for Mac. The utility is digitally signed, and you can verify that this is verified publisher ProperSoft Inc. We're gonna use sample CSV file that you can download from this web page as well. Scroll down and look for, not for this page, go back. Sample CSV file, you can download it here as well. So when we select this CSV file, it has 4 transactions, 3 expenses and 1 deposit. And you can look at the file by clicking on the source tab. There is a table view that shows the CSV file as a table, and there is row view that shows how actually the file looks like if you open it as a text file. You can see it has a first line as a column names. It is very helpful for converter if your CSV file has the first line as column names in common English words like date, amount, debit, credit, payee, memo, check number, type. The converter able to understand these column names and map it without you manually mapping the file. It can figure out that this is date column, this is amount column, this is payee column, this is memo column, this is check number column, and so on. So the converter, what you see on the transaction tab is how the converter understood your CSV file. If your CSV file has multiple date columns, it may choose first column or the column it decides most appropriate, but it could be not the column you want to use. So you can review mapping if needed, or you can reassign columns, or let's say some columns has some payee and memo columns could be switched, like the converter decides that, especially if the columns are not properly marked, that there is no first line as a column names, that it sees the column, the text column, and uses it as a memo. It sees another column, text column, and uses it as payee. But for your specific file, it could be different way, like this column has to be payee and this column has to be memo. Or your CSV file doesn't have payee and memo, has just description, so you can use the description for both memo and payee. And another important moment to look at, expenses must be negative and deposits must be positive. It applies, the same rule applies either for checking account, saving account, credit card. But for some credit card files, CSV files apply in an opposite way. Amount supply is in an opposite way. What it means, it usually looks like this. Those some credit card files, they have expenses as a positive numbers, because from credit card company perspective, you are increasing balance of your credit card, and payments to the account are negative numbers since you decrease in balance on your credit card. But for QBO files, the rule does not apply. So either credit card or checking account expenses must be negative, and deposits or payments to the account must be positive. If you see If you see data like this, you should click change plus minus button once per file and verify that your amount is expense amounts are negative and deposits are positive. Another important moment, let's say some dates, especially for customers or users outside US, you may see dates in different format. So you may see dates on your CSV file. In this case, they supplied as date, months, year. For US users, it could be months, day, year. So the converter tries to understand how date format, what the date format on your CSV file. And for some obvious cases like this one, you can see that this is day because it's more than 12, and then there's months, and there's 4 digits, year. So it can figure out itself that this is the date format is day, months, year. On the transaction tab, it shows date always in the format year, months, day, regardless of how data on your CSV file. This is how you see data on the transaction tab, so you can verify that this is correctly parsed. If you see something not expected, let's say months and day are switched, you can tell converter which format to expect. You can see in this case with the way default is months, day, year, but the converter was able to figure out for these dates that dates are date, months, year. In cases when it's not obvious, for example, January 1st, not good example, for example, January 8th, you can adjust this and the converter will reload the file. What else? So this part here, this sidebar here, is for CSV file to map it, to tell the converter how data look like. So for example, I want to change payee and memo. I click review mapping, and then what I see that memo is assigned to memo and payee is assigned to payee. So I can change it this way if I need to, or if, for example, your file doesn't have column names, then you would see field 1, field 2, field 3, field 4, and here this is like your guidance, your preview, so you can see which one is field 1, field 2, field 3, and here you select which field you want to be check number, which field you want to be amount. One note about amounts, like let's say you have 2 columns, 1 debit, 1 credit, or 1 withdrawal, 1 deposit, then you set amount to do not use, and you set debit column to debit amount and credit column to credit amount. Sometimes you have 2 columns, 1 amount column, but they're all positive, but there is another special column that has values like debit, credit. For this case, then you would still use amount for amount, and then you would use record type to tell this is the column that has debit and credit values, so it can figure out which is expense and which transaction is expense, which transaction is the income. The QBO file does not have the QBO format does not carry expense income accounts. So when you import data into QuickBooks, that's when you assign expense and income accounts to the transaction. So these 2 columns, account type, account number, are not for expense income accounts. They are for multiple accounts. So if your CSV file has a checking account and credit card account, and there's a column that tells which account is which, then you can use this setup. QBO files do not have split capabilities for transactions, but you can use this split setup, for example, for PayPal files, to set this is gonna be like a fee, this is gonna be net, or this net and this fee. What it will do for QBO file, it will create two separate transactions. One is for fee, one is for net. So when it is imported into QuickBooks, you can assign different expense accounts for fee and for net. These two columns, output account type and output account ID, you can set them as part of mapping. So when you reuse mapping, you don't have to set account type as well as account number. It will be set as part of mapping. This part here is for output QBO file. The first thing to look at is account type, and you can see when I put cursor on the account type, here I can see some description, as well as here and here. So the account type is important to choose. If you're importing credit card files, you must select credit card. QuickBooks will read your account type from the QBO file and will allow you to import into account only into the same account type that it sees on QBO file. For example, QBO file has checking account, then it will show you checking accounts to choose. If QBO file has credit card account, then QuickBooks will show you only credit cards account to choose and QuickBooks to import. Account number, if you have just one file or one account, the account number could be any number, and you can set it as actual account number. You can use maybe 4 last digits of the of your actual account. You can put whole account there if you like. It is important to use different account number for different accounts. If you convert them from multiple accounts, if you have 4 or 5 accounts, please make sure to use different account numbers when you convert. That's why, to avoid confusion, use actual account number or use 4 last digits of actual account number. So when you use it, you don't have to remember which account you use for which account number you use for which account. Currency for QuickBooks has to be United States. If you have QuickBooks United States edition. For Canadian QuickBooks, it has to be Canadian, or it can be US if you have multi-currency setup. For QuickBooks US edition, it has to be US dollars. Even if you're importing for non-USD account, for example, some other currency account, into QuickBooks US, you must use US dollars currency. And balance, you can set it if you like. It really is not important, but you can set it if it is important for you when you reconcile account. QuickBooks will show you that end balance when you import a QBO file, but it will calculate balance from actual transactions. Bank ID has to be all digits number. It can be any number, and for different accounts it could be same number, but it has to be number. Branch ID, some software demands that branch ID has to be set. For QuickBooks, this does not matter. Encoding, if you import in some non-Latin characters, you can use Unicode or Hebrew or Japanese, depending on what your accounting software requires. The last thing to explain is INTU.BID number. INTU.BID number is something that is present on the QBO file, and that QuickBooks reads that number and checks if that number is allowed to be, or the bank representing that number is allowed to be imported. The 3000 is default number for Wells Fargo. You can leave this number, as Wells Fargo usually the most stable. From QuickBooks perspective, it usually always imports, but you can use different number, but you have to use it carefully. For example, you can click lookup, and if you have QuickBooks installed on your computer, you will see the full list, and the list there is important to supports banking and credit card. So if some banks have just banking, some banks have just credit card. For example, if I uncheck this one, you can see some only banking, so you cannot import credit cards, and some just credit cards, so you cannot import checking account. If you mark both of them, you can choose any bank. It really is not important which bank you choose, but you can choose bank that the name of the bank is close to your bank, or any name you like. The bank label you see only during import. It is not relevant to actual account you choose in QuickBooks. So you can import this Citizen State Bank of Korea, put on a QBO file, but your actual account in QuickBooks will be from different bank. You are choosing account to which you want to import your data. This button is for US customers, this button is for Canadian customers. What it does, it says default values here, typical values to have your QBO file imported if you have Canadian edition of QuickBooks, and this is US edition of QuickBooks. Duplicate Payee and Memo when missing. So if your CSV file has just one column, you can use this box, this checkbox, and duplicate both of them. It is important that Payee is limited to 32 characters by QBO specification, and Memo is limited to 150 characters by QBO specification. So you will see shorter version in a Payee column, and when you import into QuickBooks, you will see shorter version for Payee column. So let's try to convert this. Again, check dates, check amount is negative, and deposit is positive. In QuickBooks, the QBO file is Web Connect file. So you import it through File, Utilities, Import, Web Connect. Choose this file. So as you can see that the bank label I mentioned before for 3000 shows as Wells Fargo Bank, account type checking, account number as those numbers. Now it says to use existing account or create new account. So your new, I don't have any accounts yet. So I will choose to create new account. Important moment here, you may have account, but it is already, you already use it to download transactions directly from your bank. But you need to import some transactions for previous months. And you're using CSV2QBO to convert those transactions to QBO format, but then you try to import it and it's not listed here. What you do is you have to edit account. So go to I'm gonna show it later. you edit account and you unlink it first to import the QBO file, and then you unlink it again and link back to your bank. So let's say, so we leave it like this, continue. Your Web Connect file was successfully imported. Where it is imported? It is imported into bank feeds, not an actual account, but first in a bank feed. This is the second place you can see the bank label. Only when you import you see bank label, and when you review transactions you see that bank label. That bank label will not be seen anywhere once you review transactions. That's why it's not important which bank you choose for the QBO file, as long as this bank is allowed to be imported. So click transaction list to review transactions. Why we have to review transactions? That's QuickBooks process to import QBO files. It usually the process also called matching, that when you match payee names on the QBO file that usually do not match your payee names, or do not match fully do not match vendor records in QuickBooks you have in QuickBooks. So payee you see as downloaded as, and payee here is not empty, is not selected yet. The vendor record is not selected yet. So this is where you select your vendor records. When you create vendor record, there is also default expense account to set. So in your vendor records, do set your default expense or income account, because this account will be pre-filled here when you choose vendor record. If all transactions look good, you can select them and then approve. That's when you approve transactions, they will be added to the register. There is also this checkbox, show bank memo, and show bank memo will show that memo from the QBO file that may have important information for you when you review transactions. So do click that checkbox if you want to see memo from the QBO file. Thank you.